Hey everyone, welcome back to your Freedom Makers podcast series. I'm your host, Ashild Tilrem, and we're exploring the topic burnout to nurses and what to do when the career you love make you sick. Today we will continue to discuss our workplace and our work environment. So today I have invited a very special and exciting guest called Dr. Geri Puleo. She is the creator of the BDOC model, Burnout During Organizational Change model. She's also the CEO of Change Management Solutions, an e-learning company dedicated to eradicating the stressor that leads to workplace burnout. She has more than 25 years of experience with a PhD in management, specializing in organizational change and burnout. So for everyone who's watching, please sit back, relax, and just enjoy. So welcome, Geri. I'm so happy to have you here on this show.
Oh, Ashild, I am thrilled to be here and to be a part of your summit.
Wow. So Geri, can we just start with would you just start to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and why you got motivated to study burnout?
Well, okay, I come to burnout research a little bit different from other people. Most people who do burnout research have burned out and then they went through recovery and they tried to figure out how they recovered in order to help other people. I, on the other hand, had worked as a career consultant for years, and I found all of these high performers that were stressed out, burned out, and they ended up leaving their jobs. And so I was curious about that. So I wanted to look at it from the individual side, what personality traits caused it, what assumptions, things like that. But then I also wanted to look at it from the organizational side, what is going on in the organization. So I ended up going back and I got my master's in HR and human resources to figure out the organizational side. Then I went on for an MBA, and in both of them I focused on leadership and work-life balance. And then I did my PhD, and that's what resulted in my burnout during organizational change, or BDOC model. And in it I discovered the process to go from high hope and expectations with your job, descending into burnout, and then how to recover from it. So that's how I got into the burnout research.
But you experienced going through a burnout period yourself.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And what was bad about it is I had a friend of mine say, well, you can't burn out. I said, well, what do you mean you can't burn out? He said, you're the expert. And so it was funny when I had this burnout, I was checking off all of the boxes. It's like, yeah, I was all excited and high hopes. Now I'm frustrated. Okay, now I'm getting angry. Now I'm apathetic, and I knew the next stage was burnout. So I'm watching all of this. And ironically, what I discovered was a model that I developed earlier in my career when I started with my PhD, and it was called the burnout triumvirate. And what I discovered is its personality traits, combined with organizational factors or what's going on in the environment. And then it seems that people admit they're burned out when they get to the third part of the triumvirate, which is the physical problems. Sleep disturbances, weight gain, all that kind of thing. And so I watched myself going through that. And then I also watched myself going through the same stages as I recovered, which was either a physical or psychological separation from what was producing the burnout. Going into, I've always been very self-reflective, but this was even more so. And then finally, the recovery is having a new psychological contract with work. In other words, this is what I will give to an employer and to a work situation, and this is what I expect back. And I think once you understand that, it's much easier to avoid burnout producing situations or overcome them if you happen to find yourself in them.
Yeah, that's for sure. So Geri, when I was reading your bio, I was just thinking, no wonder why that woman got burnout. Managed to accomplish all these trainings, medications.
Well, it's funny because burnout often hits the overachievers.
Yes.
And I'm doing some research on this now because overachievers are not necessarily high performers. because the overachievers are searching for perfection, whereas the high performers are looking for excellence.
Exactly.
So, and there's a big difference. You can never be perfect. And what my idea of perfect is may not be a coworker or boss's idea of what perfect is. So yeah,
So lazy people doesn't get burnout.
Well, you want to hear something crazy though? This is what amazes me is burnout. That's why I think it's so insidious, is we think of the overachievers only as burning out, but it's also the people who are bored in their work or have no control of their work, who are dissatisfied, who feel that they're being underutilized, who also burn out.
Yeah.
So it's both ends of the spectrum.
Yes, for sure. So before we continue, can we just say something about what is burnout? Because burnout is so much more than a bad day or a bad week or
well, I can tell you what burnout isn't. If you can sleep it off in a weekend, you're just tired. You're not burned out.
Exactly.
I have a free online course called An Introduction to Burnout, or What is Burnout? And Freudenberger was a Freudian psychoanalyst who originally discovered the burnout phenomenon. And he found 12 to 13 stages that people went through. A big part of it was denial. Then you had Christina Masloch with her burnout inventory, who looked at it as burnout is not just an individual problem, it's an organizational problem. And there's high feelings of exhaustion, cynicism, but low productivity. And then, as I mentioned in my BDOC model, it's kind of an inverse bell curve. You start with high hope, move through frustration, anger, apathy, full-blown burnout. And then the recovery is the physical, psychological separation, self-reflection, and then the revised psychological contract with work.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit more about this BDOC model you developed?
Well, BDOC, I think what's important about it is, you know how we talked about two different kinds of people can burn out, the overachievers or the people who are being underutilized. Because I was focusing on burnout during organizational change, the change leaders seem to take about 2 years to burn out. However, the change targets are the people who were told to change but had nothing to do with how they were to change. They burned out in 6 months. So that was an important finding, which kind of differentiated it from others. And then the recovery, I discovered, took about 2 years. Now, that's a long time.
Yes.
And when I did my TEDx talk, which is on YouTube and gets comments and things, I've gotten feedback that, okay, I'm not going crazy. You know, I can't just, I left my job, I gave myself a month, I should be great. Why am I not great? So, you know, it's about a 2-year process. And then the other thing that's important about the BDOC model is something can trigger you, and it's called residual burnout. And you can go right back into the frustration, anger, apathy, or a full-blown burnout. And in my opinion, I think that's why so many workers are disengaged from work, because they burned out, they left, they went into recovery, they ended up getting into a similar situation, they discovered the residual burnout, they're burned out again. So it's just this type of a thing. They never get back to those high feelings of hope and expectation and excitement about work.
Exactly. So it's just continuous roller coaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Geri, you have worked a lot in the corporate world, right? So, can you transmit or transfer your knowledge and experience to the hospital environment and the healthcare systems?
Yeah, I think that specifically, and I think this is with hospitals, healthcare, and general types of organizations, which is kind of a blanket statement, but there are certain characteristics when you're in an organization. And what I discovered were 10 organizational factors that contribute to burnout, and they're also in healthcare. Number one is poor leadership. You know, and that can be defined many different ways. Oftentimes, the poor leadership is then interpreted by the employees as the organization doesn't care about me. You know, if something happens, they'll get rid of me, put someone else in, they don't care. This can lead into a burnout environment where other employees are burning out. And there's been studies in this. You come in and you're all excited about work and everything's great, but all of your coworkers are saying, oh, this is terrible, we're getting used. Or, yeah, you're just being happy now. Wait, it's going to get worse. So the role of other employees, one of the things that I found most disturbing is if there's politics or sabotage. And in a healthcare situation, that can have life and death consequences. Not enough resources, not having the right equipment, not having enough manpower. Here in the United States, the medical residents, there is some movement to get them into unions because they're considered employees and not just part of their education. Because, residents might do 13, 14, 15, 16-hour shifts. The other thing I think that's going on in healthcare, especially here in the United States, is this overemphasis on the return on investment. It's the money. It's the money. Whereas the healthcare workers are saying, we really want to run these tests on a patient, but administration is saying, no, it's cost prohibitive, or the insurance doesn't cover it, or things like that. And then finally, poor communication, a lack of vision of where the organization is, what makes that employer so special. And then finally, the scariest one I found was unethical or illegal requests. And and I found one of them in an executive who was asked to literally fudge government tax returns. Wow. And this was in a hospital setting. So that was, she burned out real quickly after that.
So and maybe the biggest difference from the hospital culture and the corporate world is that in the healthcare system, we are dealing with life and death all the time. It's no room for mistake. If you do any mistakes, you'll get really serious consequences.
Well, and I think also when people go into healthcare, it's because they empathize and they care very deeply. It's not really a job. It's a calling. Yeah. And you want to make a difference. And I think, you would probably know this being in healthcare, that if you can't do what you think is best for the patient, it creates some real emotional distress, because it needs to be done, but you aren't permitted to do it because of the environment. And that overcaring makes it different. It's what makes healthcare workers so phenomenal, that the patients feel cared about, but it's also what can leave them much more vulnerable to burnout.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, I was reading a survey that shows that 50% of all nurses were considering leaving their job.
50. And
actually, the main cause was the work environment and workplace toxicity.
Well, they're beginning to look at research into the work environment for burnout, and it's something that I discovered in my research, and I think it's important because you have some ideas on what to look for, where you can make changes. Because the only way a company competes, whether it's a hospital, a nonprofit, a for-profit, or whatever, is through its employees. And if you've got employees who are burned out, they can't give the desired care. And God forbid that a patient suffers irreparable harm or even death. So it's an emotional environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the big question is, should I stay or should I go? And I know that you have been working as a career coach. So just something about that.
And, it's so funny that you should mention that, because I and this isn't a plug, but it's just so ironic. I have a course called Job Burnout. Should you stay or should you go?
Okay.
Yeah. And it's available on my e-learning website. But and people who have gone through it, it helped to give them clarity, because it's a tough decision. I mean, if you've been with a company for a long time, you have emotional bonds with the people you work with. You have a commitment to that. You have the fear of, am I jumping from the frying pan into the fire? If I go into another environment, is it going to be just as bad or, God forbid, worse? So it's a tough decision. It's a very, very tough decision.
It is. So what advice would you give a nurse who is considering to leave their job? What questions should they ask themselves before they make that final decision?
Well, I think one of the questions is understanding how much control you have in the situation. For example, are you setting yourself to these unachievably high standards, but the organization doesn't really require that? If that's the case, if you're the one who's setting these standards, you can do something about it. You can change your perceptions. If, however, something's going on in the environment and you can't control it, then you have to weigh it. Is it something that I can deal with, or is it a deal breaker for me? I think the other thing is you need to question, do you want to leave the employer and just work in another environment? Or are you so burned out that you want to leave nursing altogether? And that goes into a career change. Now, with the career change, a lot of people are frightened by that because they define themselves by the job title and not necessarily the duties, the responsibilities, and the competencies that they need to do that job. So, you have to make the decision, are you changing employers but staying in the same field, or are you ready to make a wholesale change? Ironically, what I found in my own research is that I think it was around 90% of my participants left the field, industry, and everything and changed careers because they thought that the entire industry was this way. It wasn't just their employer. So that's a big, those are two probably the biggest questions that, should you stay or should you go, that a nurse would have to ask. And I think the other thing is, a lot of times career decisions are made very logically and with your analytical mind. Well, it just makes sense. I've been in nursing for 20 years. Yes, I'm burned out, but it just makes sense to just go to another employer. Whereas it may be the industry has changed or what's expected has changed and I'm not getting what I want from it anymore. So in a situation like that, it's, as I said, it's very, very challenging, but you have to answer it from an emotional level. I'm a big believer that it's not just a job, but it's a career, which is a series of jobs, and your vocation or legacy, because everybody leaves a legacy. I remember talking to an attorney and he said, I have no intention of leaving a legacy. And I looked at him and I said, I hate to tell you this, but you will, whether you want to or not. And so I think that that's important. You have to go from your gut instincts and look at what you're doing and how those skills can transfer possibly to something else. But it's a very, very personal decision, and you have to be emotionally comfortable with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the good thing about nursing is that you can apply your training and education in so many different areas. So even if you're so sick and tired of this workplace and feel tired, you can just recharge your battery and maybe choose another field in the healthcare system.
Exactly.
So you can continue to be a nurse and really,
Well, I had a friend of mine who was a nurse for years, and then she went for a law degree. And you would think that she would be practicing in medical malpractice litigation. But what she did is she developed a consulting firm that she could read medical records and provide, it wasn't necessarily expert testimony, but she could help educate the attorneys on the nuances of what was going on medically in the case. So she created something totally different for herself. And I think that's the important thing, is to have enough faith in yourself and belief in yourself that you can create your own destiny and you can have more control over it. And by having more control over it, you're not a pawn to an environment that causes burnout.
Exactly. So I'm thinking that to really create sustainable change, we have to understand how our mind works.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
absolutely.
And that everything happens from the inside out and not from the outside in. It's all about how we perceive and interpret our environments.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is, I don't believe there is any such thing as reality. There's only perception.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah, please.
I was in a bank, and I ended up being in a bank robbery. I wasn't the robber. We were all standing around, and I noticed this guy up at the teller, and it was odd because he had a parka on and he had very shiny shoes. Now, that obviously is a character defect that I noticed the guy's shoes more than anything. But so all of a sudden, one of the tellers said, "We're in lockdown." And I'm like, "What?" So I'm looking around and I saw a desk and I thought, well, I'll go sit behind the desk because if the robber's in here, I can dive under the desk in case there's gunfire. Now, there were probably 6 or 8 of us in the bank. The FBI came in, handsome man, by the way, and he talked to everybody. None of us even recognized who the guy was. We couldn't tell age. We couldn't tell race. Nobody paid any attention. And what he said to me was, this is the biggest problems with it, witnesses. What they see may not be accurate.
Yeah.
And that's when I started thinking, the reality of your situation, like if you're in a hospital environment that you feel is very abusive, this is where you have to start going into the self-analysis. Yeah. Why do I perceive this as being abusive? Is it a particular leader or boss? Is it the policies? Is it the administrator? What exactly is it? Or am I a little bit sensitive to something based on what had happened in my past, which I don't like to be led in this certain manner. But it's all your perception. And if you change your perception of a situation, you change your reality. I mean, think about it. When you've dated somebody, you know how they're wonderful at first and everything's great. And then when you're breaking up, you look at the same things and say, hate it, get rid of me. Same thing, different perceptions.
Exactly. So we really have to have this internal shifts and this shift in our consciousness to really,
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing is stress in and of itself is neutral. It's just something that's happening. The way you perceive it can either make it eustress, which is the positive stress, the kind of excitement before something wonderful happens, or distress, which is the fear and anxiety of what could happen, or it can just be neutral, and you can see this in work environments. For nurses who are working night shifts, if that nurse is a morning person, working night shift is the kiss of death because it just doesn't jive with their biorhythms. But someone who's a night owl is like, this is fabulous, So it's that self-knowledge that's so critical in burnout.
Yeah. So, people who go through burnout, a real burnout period, like you said, like 2 years.
Yeah.
The life will never be the same again because it's really a journey. It's an inner process. You really learn a lot about yourself, a lot about life in general. So you mentioned one time that there is something called post-burnout growth process.
Yeah. A doctor who had burned out and left the medical field and is now working with other doctors to help them with burnout. Because here in the United States, there is a very high level of suicide amongst doctors. There can be a lot of causes for that, which we won't get into it, but they've noticed that there's a higher level of it. And he's the one who mentioned this to me. And really, I think that it's true because you have this revised psychological contract with work. In other words, you've matured in terms of how you view work in your life. Not everyone is so career driven that they're on this mission with their job. A lot of people want to do great work,
Yeah.
But their home life is just as important, if not more important. And the key is to understand what it is for you, and then to be able to craft your career around that. And once you understand those things, because, let's face it, they don't talk about it in school, how to manage your career, or, doing work that you love. And once you have that understanding, you have that revised psychological contract with work. And when you have that, you can make better decisions. You're not angsting over, should I or shouldn't I? And that's where I think the growth comes in.
Yeah. So what it all comes down to is that you really have to explore yourself, investigate your own mind, your own thinking, habits, and really ask yourself, if you're true to yourself, are you living the authentic life? Are you really on your right mission and the right workplace? So no matter how stressful situations you are surrounded by, you really just have to find this inner center and inner peace, and really, see how you.
And I think around the world, people are looking for that. The external, tangible trappings of success are not what a lot of people want now. People are beginning to downsize. They're beginning to, I don't think it's downsizing. I think it's right-sizing. Instead of having all this stuff. I mean, I've been on this purging mission where I'm getting rid of everything. So the like Goodwill and agencies like that really like me because I'm getting rid of a lot of things. But it is just being authentic. And I think there's a real craving for authenticity in the world today. And if you're authentic, just think what a better healthcare provider you can be. There's more trust.
So going through a burnout period, it's just like a wake-up call, an important wake-up call, because it will really change you, and it will really change your life for the better, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's why the residual burnout you have to watch as you're in recovery, because it's like a boomerang effect, and you just suddenly find yourself back where you used to be. And you kind of have to dig up. Have you ever heard of Sisyphus? He's in Greek mythology. He was destined to push a boulder up a mountain. And every time it got to the top of the mountain, it came back down, and he had to do it again. That's kind of the residual burnout. And it takes a lot of courage to say, this is what I want in my life, and I deserve it, and I'm going to do it. And because it creates a lot of changes. Lots of changes.
Absolutely.
But they're good. I believe they're good.
Thank you so much, Geri. You're just such an inspiration source.
I'm so thrilled to be a part of this. And I want to thank you for having this online summit, because I believe that my mission is to eradicate workplace burnout. So to be able to be a part of this is a very real honor for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Geri. I really appreciate your generous heart and generous spirit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Geri, you have a free gift for our audience?
Yes, I do. Well, we've been talking a lot about, what burnout is. And I think you have the link on the page. I have a free course called An Introduction to Burnout Recovery. And what it does is focus on 9 different strategies and techniques that the participants in my research used to get out of burnout and overcome it. And it's absolutely free. The other thing is you have lifetime access. And I come in and I monitor discussion boards. So if you have questions, you can post, and I'd be happy to have any of your listeners or viewers, I guess, viewers or listeners, depending, and to absolutely take part of it and give me some feedback in terms of if they found that these tips work, or if they found something else, and by all means share with us.
Wow. Thank you so much, Geri. It's really nice.
You're welcome.
So for people who want to learn more from Geri, they can find you on social media. You're on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, maybe?
Not Facebook.
Not Facebook. Okay.
Not Facebook. Okay, this sounds terrible, but I don't particularly like Facebook. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I've found that that I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I have 2 blogs, A New Way to Work, which is for individuals, and Change Without Burnout, which is for corporations. And then, of course, I have my e-learning site also, which is where you'll find all of the courses and things like that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. And thank you everyone for watching. So just stay tuned. We will be back tomorrow with another expert. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.